Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'm Jane Robertson from the mental health and wellbeing platform provider Frog Systems, and we're here today to talk about managing money. Well, managing your finances can seem pretty daunting at the best of times, and worries about money can affect us in so many different ways. In the current climate, we thought it'd be a great idea to get some useful, practical advice about how we can keep control of our finances and some great tips on how to improve our financial well-being. And following the Chancellor's spring statement yesterday, there is definitely plenty for us to be talking about. I'm delighted to be joined by Leigh Dunkley from the Financial Wellbeing Lead at Schroders Personal Wealth. Hi there, Leigh. Leigh's going to be taking us through what we need to do to feel a little bit more in control of our finances and some good practical steps that we can all use. And do remember, if you'd like to ask a question at any stage, please just drop it into the chat and we'll either answer them as we go along or answer them at the end of the session. Leigh, lovely for you to join us. And I know you've had a busy week because this is a big subject that everybody's talking about at the moment. Perhaps we could just start with you explaining who Schroders are and kind of what the sort of work around financial well-being is that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thanks, Jen. And it's great to be here. And you're right. What a week to be having this conversation. You know, we're celebrating Debt Awareness Week. It's Global Money Week. We're obviously pretty much bang on 2 years post going into that first lockdown as part of the pandemic. And we had the Chancellor's kind of spring budget yesterday. So lots going on in the financial world, but prompting lots of questions. So I'm the Financial Wellbeing Lead at Schroders Personal Wealth. And Schroders Personal Wealth, we are a financial advice, financial planning company at heart. We've got over 300 personal wealth advisors, so financial advisors based right around the country. And really, we're there to help individuals, their families have these conversations around money, finances, everything that goes around that. But more importantly, put those plans in place to make sure that as we're going through this world where there is a lot of uncertainty, volatility at this moment in time, but we look back through history, we've always got some form of volatility, something going on, but making sure people have that peace of mind, they've got that plan in place, they know what their money is doing, and it reduces that burden, that stress, that anxiety that a lot of us feel when we start to think and talk about our money and our finances.
So we sort of talk about it, you being a financial wellbeing lead, and we hear that phrase financial wellbeing a lot, but what does financial wellbeing actually mean?
It's such a great question. And actually, I think sometimes when we hear that word, we're like, oh, it's another buzzword. It's another, phrase of the year. But what does it actually mean? And quite often when I'm talking to people and I ask them, what does financial well-being mean to you? Quite often I'm met with responses such as, Leigh, I want to earn more money. I want to progress in my career. I want to be able to buy more things and do more things. And whilst, yes, physically having more pounds and pence in our bank accounts will allow us to buy more things, actually, what the research shows us is that there is not a direct correlation between how much money we have and actually how well we are, what our sense of financial well-being is, what our sense of happiness is in life. So when I'm talking about financial well-being, whether it's to, employers, their employees, individuals, families, children, whoever that might be, we're really talking about actually giving people that toolkit, that education, that understanding to be able to feel more confident in managing and engaging with their finances so that they ultimately feel empowered to be able to make good financial decisions now that will hopefully have that really positive, tangible, practical, outcome in the future.
It's a kind of security, isn't it? Security, being secure in your finances or feeling secure in your finances and feeling like you're in control of your finances as well, because it's that awful time when, you feel that your financial situation is spiraling out of control. And there are so many times that people put their head in the sand around that, isn't there? If you can get ahead of it and get on top of it, then, the impact on the rest of your life can be quite significant, can't it?
Hugely. And that's when we talk about financial well-being, quite often, with our well-being, financially is just one pillar out of quite a number of pillars of well-being that we talk actively about. And we've done a lot of research in this space at Schroders Personal Wealth, and the latest research showed that actually more than half of us are saying that we're concerned about our finances, and that's on the regular, that's on a day-to-day basis. When we think about our mental health, the figure that we all know is the 1 in 4, right? So 1 in 4 of us will experience, a mental health problem in our lifetime. And so when we overlay that conversation, that topic about our finances, that figure's become 1 in 2. 1 in 2 of us is feeling anxiety, stress, maybe even depression when it comes to talking about our finances. And I've just said, when it comes to talk about our finances, we don't talk about our finances and money. It is absolutely the last taboo. Our finances are something that we perceive as really personal, really complex. So we put it in that box, we shut that box really, really tight, and we push it to one side and we think, do you know what? I'll deal with that when it becomes a problem, when it becomes something I need to deal with in the future. And that is a really bad mentality that we've got ourselves into, because actually at that point of crisis, when something happens in our life and we have to open that box and deal with our finances, often it's then too late. It's too late to then make any real changes or plans for the future or put us back on the right track and right course, because we've left it until the point of crisis. So we need to get better at normalizing that conversation of money and our finances, and then making sure that we've got those plans in place for the times that are what if.
Yeah. It always amazes me that we don't have more financial advice given at school, when we're at school, so that you're actually prepared for it. Because when you think the drastic change that people undergo when they leave school, whether that's going on to study, further, or going straight into a job, suddenly you've got to control a budget, and the advice you get is very minimal. So anyway, yeah, it's a growing problem, isn't it? But again, hopefully one that we can have some positive advice on today from you, and delighted that you could join us. So we've talked about the sort of the impact that can have on the rest of our life, and that's clearly very, very important. So when we look back at the spring statement yesterday, it started off, it felt very positive, some tax cuts, a lowering of fuel duty, the increase in the threshold for national insurance contributions, the promise of the income tax to come, a couple of years down the line. But actually when the all the researchers got to look at the statement afterwards, it's clear that that's really not going to solve a lot of the problems that people are going through at the moment, and a lot of people are actually going to be desperately worse off and in that terrible situation where they're trying to juggle what's important and what's not. So when we're looking at what people can do at the moment, Leigh, what are the sort of practical things that we should be looking at? Are there some sort of steps that you can take us through to sort of guide us on the types of things that we should be looking at in terms of what we spend our money on at the moment, where we might be able to try and, create a little bit of kind of a bit of a better situation for ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'll take a little bit of a step back, because I think one of the things that happens when we have the budgets, when these announcements come out, is actually it can be just a lot of words and numbers. And actually it's that, what does that mean for me as an actual human person living my day-to-day life? So I think if we look back at what Rishi said yesterday, so right, it started off quite positive. I think there's absolute acknowledgement to where we've come. We've had the pandemic, we've obviously got the war that's going on at the moment in Ukraine and involving Russia, and that is two massive events that are absolutely having an impact on the economies, on the markets. And for those of you that maybe haven't looked at this in too much detail, essentially what happens is when we have investments, and that might be things like investing in a stocks and shares ISA, it might be even things like our workplace pension schemes. When we have our money held in those kind of types of assets, the providers that we have our money with, they are then investing money on our behalf, and they will be investing in things like equity. So that are those are the stocks and shares, that's essentially company ownership, and that might be overseas companies, it might be things like Apple, Google, Amazon, those types. And we might then also be investing in things like properties. It might be commercial property, residential. And we'll have things like commodities, so those raw, materials that can be traded, things like copper and coffee. And there's a whole host of different what we call asset classes where our money can be invested in. And because a lot of this stuff is done on an international scale, when there are things happening in the world like the pandemic, like wars, they will create really kind of quite volatile movements in the markets because there's that uncertainty. So essentially people are buying into different types of investments, other people are selling types of investments, trying to gauge what the market is going to do. And it creates this volatility and uncertainty. So kind of putting that into context. And what Rishi started talking about was in terms of our UK economy, actually it's quite positive. We're expecting growth of the UK economy of just shy of 4%. That's where we think we're going to get to by the end of this year. When we look back previous 2 years, we obviously had a really sharp decline in growth. Our economy actually shrunk in 2020 when the pandemic was first around. And last year, actually, we rebuilt some of that growth, which was fantastic. So to see nearly another 4% growth this year is great. But we've got this real issue of inflation, right? We've kind of averaging that inflation will settle at around an average of, I think it was 7.4% that was quoted by Rishi yesterday. So we know the cost of our living is increasing massively. So whilst we had some really, I thought, quite positive things will come in, like I said, the 5p reduction in the fuel duty will hopefully try and help some of that. We had the reduction in the VAT rate. So for people that are looking to, I guess, invest in sustainable energy, things like solar panels, insulation, heat pumps, actually the VAT is going to be completely scrapped for those. So actually go completely down to 0%. So great initiative to start thinking about how we can be kind of heating our homes in a more sustainable way and reducing some of those energy costs. And then we've obviously got the national insurance contributions, which I wanted to touch on. So the planned rise of 1.25% still to remain, although he did talk about actually we're going to increase those thresholds to bring it in line with the income tax, the personal tax allowance thresholds, which should hopefully ease some of that increase to people around the UK. Is it enough? Time will tell. And I think when we look at actually what's happened to the UK over the last kind of 2 years since we were going through the pandemic, is actually it feels like we've got a little bit more polarization. So actually that disparity between people that are more breadline, on the poverty line, struggling, feels like that's getting worse. And then there's people at the other end of that spectrum who actually, maybe weren't impacted so much by the pandemic. Maybe their jobs were sustainable, they weren't impacted by things like furlough, reduction in hours. And actually they were able to save and they've got a bit more disposable income now because they haven't been able to go on some of those holidays of the last 2 years, upgrade the car, some of the things that they maybe would have done previously. But I think it doesn't matter which kind of camp you're sitting in. I think we're all going to start to feel some of these pressures that are coming down the line when we look at kind of the increase in cost of living. So I guess back to that, what can we be doing? When we sit down and we talk to people, the biggest thing we recommend is just having a plan in place. And there's kind of 4 steps to that we've always taught people through. But I think the first thing for me is really having a good grasp on what do your finances look like today? Where are we today? What does that all mean? And the way that we often do that when we're kind of speaking to our clients or individuals is what we call an income and expenditure. So a lot of people who are listening today might have heard of the term income and expenditure being used kind of before or previous, but essentially all it is whether it's using a handy online tool, whether it's using a nice Excel spreadsheet, whether it's good old-fashioned pen and paper, whatever method suits you the best. It's simply a case of writing down everything that is coming into your household, into your family each and every month, and everything that is going out.
And being honest about that as well, isn't it? And being very, very brutally honest with yourself about what that
brutally on it, absolutely. And that's why I'd always encourage people to either do it on an annual level, but it's going to take a little bit of time to do that, especially for the first time, and get out those bank account statements. Get them out, print them off, have them online, have them open. Every single line coming in and going out, you need to be putting into a different bucket on your spreadsheet. So if we look at income side of it, it's what's coming from your employer, but that might be your basic salary. It could be any commissions, it could be any overtime, any bonuses you're entitled to, anything that comes from that employer, stick it in there. There might be people listening who are in receipt of pension income. So actually that might be a personal pension that you've started to access from the age of 55. It might be a state pension if actually you're a little bit further on in that journey and you are retired, and that is your kind of more active, biggest part of income. Get that down there. Have we got any other income? Things like, are we receiving any rental income? Do we have any other properties? What does that look like? Do we have any side hustles or hobbies that are generating a bit of income for us? Quite often we forget some of the money that is coming in. Other benefits, are we entitled to any benefits from the state in terms of child maintenance? Are we getting any child maintenance from maybe ex-partners, ex-spouses? Get that on there. That is income coming into you and your family home. So making sure we've got that full picture. And then the same for outgoings. Categorize them into buckets. If I was going to do that, the first bucket I would have is that long-term planned expenditure. These are things that you are committed to paying for at least 12 months. So things like your mortgage, your rent payments, if you've got any long-term pension contributions going out, if you've got any long-term loans, or credit cards that you are committed to paying for a significant amount of time, get those on there first. Then start to look at things like household bills. And this is a really, really crucial thing that I want everybody listening today to go away and do. Start to look through your direct debits. Our household bills, I can't tell you the amount of people that we speak to where, we get sucked into these introductory offers. So typically you'll set up, it might be a mobile phone contract, a TV subscription, whatever it might be, is we get sucked into a 12-month contract. We're getting great value for our money, and we set up a direct debit and we leave it to run in the background and we forget about it. And then all of a sudden, 3 years have passed, the price has tripled, the service is still the same, and we've got no idea what we're even doing. Are we even using that service anymore? So my top tip there is go through and scrutinize those direct debits and what is coming out in the background. I can't emphasize this enough. I'll do it at least once a year and actually sit there and say, am I really using this service? If I'm not, cancel it, get rid of it. We can always reinstate Netflix in 6 months' time if we're missing it. But if we're not using it today, let's get rid. Have a good clear out and make sure that we're not paying for anything that we're just not using. It's the biggest kind of waste of money that I see people do very, very often. And it is one of the biggest ways that people are susceptible to scams. We are not checking our outgoings enough. Yeah. And when we think about scams and people falling ill to them, it quite often someone will get hold of your bank details, they'll clone a credit card, and they'll start to take a small amount. These scammers, the fraudsters, they might order a pizza and they'll see if the money goes out, they'll see if the pizza's delivered. And if it does, they'll try something a little bit more expensive. And because we're not in the habit of checking our statements regularly, the first time we notice might be when they try to buy a laptop worth a couple of £1,000, and all of a sudden we realise that we've been having money taken out of our account for months. We just not even realised it. So having a good handle on what is going out of your account each and every month would be by far my biggest top tip, because you just learn so much about spending patterns, where your money's going, and real prompts about actually if there's any areas where we can cut back that cost, that's how we're going to identify it.
Yeah, and you're right with that. I know I was talking to a friend recently, and she'd sort of gone through her outgoings, and actually just through putting it on paper had realised that she was spending a lot of money on repairs to her car. And actually, when she looked at the money that she'd spent on the repairs on the car, it made total sense to actually invest in a newer car.
Yes.
And, and that was the solution, which actually, when you think about it, you would never think, well, I need to go and buy a new car. That's going to solve my financial problems. So it's almost the reverse sometimes, isn't it? Uncovering what you are actually spending your money on, whatever that is, can suddenly highlight somewhere that you could actually make quite a substantial saving by doing it completely differently, or as you say, ditching the service completely that you're not using.
Massively. And that brings me on to like one of the biggest things we talk to people about is having that emergency cash buffer fund, that rainy day fund for if an emergency crops up, if the car breaks down, if the boiler breaks, if the kids need new school uniforms. Make sure you have that pot of money set aside. And when I say that, stay aside, get it out of your current account, set up a separate savings account so there's not that temptation to dip into it because it's there and we can see it there. Have it separate, because it's that whole thing of, I think it was my dad or my granddad used to tell me the anecdote of, you've got this man that's, he's wealthy and he can afford to buy, really great quality pair of boots. And these boots last him 20 years because they're really great quality and they've maybe cost, £200. It was a big initial outlay, but they're going to see him through. The rain is not getting through those boots, right? And then you've got the other guy that's actually, he's going to struggle. He doesn't have £200 to outlay straight away. So he has to buy £20 boots. But those £20 boots, they're ruined in 2 weeks. There's holes in them, the water's coming through. So he has to keep replacing these boots. And if you looked at that 20-year horizon, actually the man that can only afford the £20 boots has actually well exceeded and spent more than the person that's invested and bought those £200 boots. And I think that plays right back to that conversation of, if we're actively just saving little and often, when those emergencies arise, if the boiler breaks, we can sit there logically and say, actually, is it a small repair or is it a replacement? And actually, I don't need to stress and worry about that because I've got my buffer fund. I've made sure that I've got that money there available. So actually, we can get to the root cause of the problem and actually fix it, rather than trying to put plasters over stuff that is then going to cost us more in the long term.
Yeah, it's that, because we live in that kind of internet sort of throwaway culture, don't we, now, that you can buy something, it'll be delivered the next day. You try it on, you think, oh well, maybe I will wear it, and then you look in your wardrobe 2 years later and you've hardly worn the things that you've bought, or you've ended up throwing them away because they've fallen apart. So that kind of long-term thought is not just about investment, it's about practicalities, isn't it?
Hugely. And I think that's one of the biggest ways that a lot of us are going to get through the next kind of year, is by just really just taking that time to step back and get more efficient. The amount of times I'll be in and out in the car, get back home, I've forgotten that thing, got to get back in the car, drive 10 miles down the road. We're living in a world now where actually the cost of fuel and things are going up. One of the biggest ways we're going to save is by just being more efficient. Let's make sure we're just taking 5 minutes in the morning to say, right, what are all the things that I need to do today? What's the best route and way to do them? And let's get really more efficient. Actually, is it getting back to old school, just reaching out and caring? Actually, if you're popping out for some milk and eggs, knock on a neighbour's door. Do they need anything getting while you're out? Do they want a car share to Tesco's and back again? So that we're not wasting and duplicating efforts. And I get, they're not going to absolutely shift the dial, but the more we can just get into this mindset of being really efficient and affecting and helping each other out, surely that's got to make a difference.
Yeah. And like you say, just small steps that you can take to just maybe be a little bit more cost efficient can actually reap huge benefits in the long term, can't they?
Absolutely. And there's so many great suggestions and things. One of the organisations that we partner with is the Money and Pension Service. So they revamped their website last year. It's moneyhelper.org.uk. There are so many tools, resources, calculators, budget planners, top tips for actually how we can the impacts of just, turning the heating down by 1 degree, actually how we can maximize, where we're even shopping for our food. Again, if we think back to when my grandparents were younger, we didn't really have Tesco's and things. Actually, they went to market stalls. Now, market stalls still exist. You go to your local butchers, farmers, you can get that local produce, really great quality. And actually, you can stock up your fridge for pretty much £3.50. There's a lot, but it's that we're in a society, in a world where convenience is everything for us. And I think, again, it's just resetting our minds a little bit to say, actually, let's not go for the quickest route to market. Let's not go for the most convenient option anymore. Let's really think about how much is this going to cost us, and actually what's going to give us the most value in the long run.
Most of us will have some kind of debt, mortgage or whatever it is, student loan. Do we need to, when sometimes when you sort of think about that, it can be quite scary. But again, is there a good way to sort of look at your debt, good way to manage your debt as well as your overall financial situation?
Yeah, definitely. Debt is a huge part of a lot of our lives. At some point in our life, most of us, the majority of us, will have some form of debt. And I think when we say the word debt, there is still this real stigma and negative connotation around it. It's like, oh, you have debt. That's really, really bad. But actually, I think we need to kind of rephrase it, because there are good debts and there's bad debts. And good debts is absolutely what you've just spoken about, Jane. So actually, not many of us can go out there and buy a house in cash and not need a mortgage. So having things like a mortgage, a student loan, things like finance on a card, those kind of significant purchases in life, absolutely good debts. And we do want some debt in our lives, because actually debt is how we improve our credit rating. By having some form of debt and being able to show that you can repay that debt on time is actually really beneficial for your credit rating. And that's how you then build up that credit score, and that allows you to then get better rates and better access to other debts in the future. So actually, a mortgage, for example, if as a young student, you've maybe had a credit card, and each week you've put your food shopping on that credit card, but at the end of every month you've paid it off in full, you've never had late penalties, it's just been a good way to build up that credit rating. Actually, then in your mid-20s, if you then come to buy your first house, the banks, the lenders, they will have seen that credit history and actually your credit worthiness. So they are more likely to, lend you essentially more money or give you a better rate or a preferential rate. So debt can be really, really good. Bad debts, on the other hand, is when we are either not paying those debts off promptly, we're getting late fees, we're racking up debts that actually, and we're only able to pay kind of the minimum payments off each month, and they're becoming a heavy burden. They're becoming a stress and a strain and unmanageable. And those are kind of those bad debts. We obviously saw payday loans were huge, not kind of 5-10 years ago. They were so easily accessible, but the interest rates were phenomenal. And it's no wonder, that they now know they cease to exist. Regulation, the government has stepped in, because it was just encouraging people to get into lots of bad debt. So if we do need to get into debt, let's make sure that we're having those really proactive conversations with our bank, with our existing lenders, to say, this is a situation that I am in. Can we explore any lines of credit or something that will help me, and come to some form of repayment plan that is realistic and that we can stick to? And I think a lot of people are afraid to have those conversations with their banks and lenders, but honestly, they are there to help you. They understand the world we are living in. They understand the pressures. They would rather help you now than actually you start to default on things like your credit card payments, your mortgages, any other form of debt, and then they have to, they're wondering why you've not reached out, that you're unable to be contacted. That's when people get to that crisis point. That's when people start to have their homes repossessed. They have to, declare themselves as bankrupt, because we've left it too long and we've not had that conversation. So if you are in that, if you're sat there going, I'm feeling the pressures, I don't know where to turn, your banks and your lenders, absolutely first port of call, go and have an honest conversation with them.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, because I know we're sort of almost out of time here, Leigh, but I just wanted to kind of end with, if somebody is on this discussion and is concerned, so talk to your existing lenders as much as you can. Would you talk to your employer? I mean, do employers listen? I read a statistic, something like 7 out of 10 employees hide their money concerns from their employer. Is your employer in a position to help you in any way? And are there charities? You mentioned the money advice helpline. I think there's Step Change as well, isn't there? If you could kind of just run through where somebody should go if they do need help, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely, you're right. The research we did last year was only 3% of people would ever share their money worries with their employer, and that is it is incredibly low, because a lot of employers are fantastic, absolutely fantastic in being able to provide support. We have seen, even when we think about mental health, we've seen how much the dynamic has changed, how much we have managed to combat the stigma around our mental health in the workplace, and our financial wellbeing has to be next. With your employer, most employers have things like an EAP set up. They are not just there for crisis point, and they are not just there for mental health. If you have any questions, queries about any of your wellbeing, anything that's going on in life, pick up the phone to support systems. If you don't have an in-house EAP, then, again, those external charities, Citizens Advice Bureau, Money and Pension Service, Step Change Debt Charity, all three that are completely impartial, backed by, either the government or credible backings, and there to really help. Employers, a lot of employers will also have wider employee benefits in place. So actually there are potentially you could get advanced payroll, either from a provider or a benefit your employer's got in place, or actually a lot of employers, if you approach the HR team, explain that actually, you're struggling this month, you might be a little bit short, can you access, have an advance on next month's payroll early? A lot of employers will accommodate that. A lot of employers will sit down with you, look at those situations, help you to work out that plan. So absolutely, nobody is going to penalise you from coming forward and asking for help. I cannot stress that enough. And your employer, they have support systems in place to be able to help you have those conversations as well.
Leigh, thank you so much. It's been really enlightening and really excellent sort of practical advice that I think we can all take away with us today. Just to let the people know that have tuned in today, the wellbeing platforms, if you've got one with us from Frog Systems, we do signpost organisations that offer money and debt advice. So if your organisation does have one of our wellbeing platforms, just search for money and finance. And we've actually put a lot of resources that Leigh has mentioned today, and some of the slide decks that all about financial planning and financial wellbeing that Leigh has provided us with as well. If anybody has got any questions, do pop them in now. I can see quite a lot of people saying how helpful this has been, so thank you so much for tuning in. We'll send you all the link to this recording, so obviously you can watch it back again if that helps you, and also do share it with your friends, your family, work colleagues, anybody that you think it might help. From Frog Systems' point of view, please have a look at our website. If you think that you would like to have mental health and wellbeing support and you haven't got that in your organisation already, do get in touch, have a look at our website. You can follow us on our social media, and we'll be putting this recording up on our YouTube channel as well. And there's a newsletter that you can sign up to as well. So do keep in touch with us. I'm delighted to say also that Leigh and the team at Schroders are offering a free financial health check to you, to everybody who's listened into this discussion today. We'll send that link to you with the email follow-up and the recording afterwards. So that'll come through to you probably later today or tomorrow. So do please take advantage of that. There's no obligation, is there, Leigh? And it might just be the prompt that sort of helps you to feel a little bit more secure about your financial situation. So Leigh, thank you so much. We've got lots more interesting discussions coming up in the coming weeks and months. The next one will be all about the menopause, so we hope you can join us then. But again, thanks so much for joining us today, and do take care of yourselves. Bye.